If you were born anytime after the late 90s and are also a video gamer, Shadow of the Colossus is a game that you've most likely heard of but might not have actually played or know much about. In 2005, all I had was an Xbox with 5 games that my parents didn't even buy for me. I got them as a gift, but if I ever asked to buy any more games, the answer would have been a big fat no. So it should go without saying that when Shadow of the Colossus came out that year, I was just some dumb clueless kid drinking out of those fucking Nike water bottles that kids love playing with. Just kidding. My parents never bought one of those for me either. As you've probably pieced together, the first experience I really had with Shadow of the Colossus was with the PS4 remake in 2018. And although I initially struggled to appreciate the game, after some time it kind of grew on me and I realized that without this game's success, a lot of newer games that I'm a huge fan of like Nier and Undertale and a lot of other story-driven games might not exist. Or maybe they would, but I think it's quite fair to say that Shadow of the Colossus is one of the few successful games that really paved the way early on for these other more artistic titles to be created. But all that being said, I am going to be kind of critical of the game in this video, so if you're one of the people who think this is a 10 out of 10 flawless masterpiece, just know that this video isn't meant to change you or anyone else's mind, and the real reason I'm making this is so that if you ever come across someone who tells you, oh, you know, I didn't really like Shadow of the Colossus that much, your first instinct isn't to immediately do this. And conversely, if you're someone who just doesn't get why people like Shadow of the Colossus so much, I am also going to talk about what makes the game special and why it's so important. So hopefully we can all just get along and have a healthy little discussion about video games, but it is the internet, so my hopes aren't super high. So strap in tight, boys and girls, because you're basically about to hear all my bottled up thoughts from 2018. So to start things off, I think it's important to first talk about why Shadow of the Colossus is so highly regarded and the reason why so many people love it, and that is the game's story. The premise is pretty straightforward, you know, pretty girl is dead, so in order to make her not dead, aka alive, you have to set out on a journey with your legendary sword and kill 16 of these giant, creatures. What are they called again? Oh, right, sorry. My bad. But as you progress through the game and kill more and more of these colossi, this idea that you're the hero of this story trying to save the princess or whatever slowly gets flipped over in subtle ways until the end where it's revealed that by destroying these 16 colossi, you are actually undoing the seal that was placed on this ancient being who was just trying to use you to resurrect themselves. And then you die, but then the girl gets revived and then there's a baby, and then the end. I'm aware that this is probably an extremely shitty summary. By and large, the game is more of an atmospheric and cinematic experience. A good amount of the time you spend in it will be on riding around on your horse and just taking in the game's scenery. The only really video gamey part about the game is killing the colossi, but even that was done in a pretty unconventional way. In today's world, there are quite a few newer, well-known games that, like Shadow of the Colossus, take this preconceived notion players have where it's like, hey, I'm gonna go and kill everyone and everything the game throws at me because it's a fucking video game and violence is kind of fun and I'm like the main character who has plot armor, so like whatever, right? And use this to affect the player in an unexpected way in their stories and gameplay. But back in 2005, there really weren't many other games I can think of that even attempted something similar with their narratives besides like Metal Gear Solid. Which is to say that for people who played Shadow of the Colossus back when it originally came out, its ending must have been fucking insane. But even in present times, a good majority of games are still mainly about how fun it is to kill stuff and level up, which is why I think Shadow of the Colossus' story is still incredibly powerful, because it is all about subverting that idea. I specifically remember myself being very intrigued by the fact that whenever you kill a Colossus, this sad music plays and you get fucking impaled by these black tentacle thingies which make your character start spewing out squid ink. Compare this to most other games where you kill giant monsters and after you defeat one, the game goes like da 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 da, and it's like, wow, you can craft a new fucking hat now. Even with how common it is for video games to have interesting and impactful stories now, it's still really easy to look back at these good moments and go, wow, this is still a really cool scene. Just because I've already seen other games with amazing narratives and storytelling doesn't make a good story any worse. It's like eating good food. I've eaten a lot of good food before, but if you put a bowl of ramen in front of me, I'm gonna fucking eat it and enjoy it. And like I mentioned earlier, the success of Shadow of the Colossus was and still kind of is a really important thing, because it's proof that hey, there's reason to try to make games that are more than just mindless entertainment that are about how fun it is to rip people's heads off and light them on fire and chainsaw them in half. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that games like that are bad, because that's fucking stupid. Doom Eternal is like one of my favorite games ever, and it's pretty much exactly what I just described, except, you know, replace people with demons. But without the early success of games like Shadow of the Colossus, there would be a lot less reason to make games like Nier or Undertale or Outer Wilds or Disco Elysium or Inside that really push the way stories are told through the medium of video games. Because as pragmatic as it sounds, game developers need to earn money. So the fact that this game did so well and is still regarded as like one of the best games ever made is a testament to the fact that there is a market for these artistic games and that people are able to appreciate them. But putting aside all that stuff about games and art, I think there's still plenty of things to like about Shadow of the Colossus' story. In the video I made about Nier Replicant that one person watched, I talked a lot about how that game's story leaves you with a lot of things to think about and how no two people would interpret it the same way. And it's kind of the same with this game, especially with its ending. For example, during that short segment of the game at the end where you control Dorman, I found it impactful because throughout the entire game it's kind of like, hey, look at these giant monsters, don't you want to go and kill them? It looks like fun, right? And I'm like, hell yeah, gonna fucking stab that motherfucker. But during the ending when the game goes, okay, now you get to be the giant monster and here are some people for you to kill. Fun, right? This time I'm like, no. Nah, I don't really want to do that. But for my friend Marmar, it was more along the lines of like, okay, so the game has established from the beginning that the objective is to save the pretty lady, so I'm gonna do whatever it takes to achieve that, even if it means I gotta kill these people, and even if I knew this was all gonna happen from the start, I still would have went through with killing all the colossi. So to him, this moment could have been more of like a test to see how far you're willing to go to save someone you care about. And I think we can all agree that this final moment where you're grabbing onto the stairs to get back to Mono, the same way you've been grabbing onto the colossi the entire game, is such a clever and powerful way to use one of the game's core mechanics in service of its story. Like, I genuinely get chills every time I think about it because it is so goddamn cool. Even though I think some aspects of the game haven't aged as well, which we're gonna talk about in a little bit, I think Shadow of the Colossus is a game that every person who even remotely gives a shit about video games should at least play through once because 1, it's not very long, it's only like 6 hours, and 2, it's still one of the most unique experiences out there you can get from a game. Its masterful use of the medium to tell such a great story and its ability to affect people in an emotional way like how a good piece of art does is enough to make it worth playing. It might seem kind of ironic for me to go off about Shadow of the Colossus' gameplay after talking a whole bunch about why it's this artistic gem that isn't just brain-dead entertainment, so let me just clear some of that shit up for a second. I'm of the opinion that with the technology available nowadays, it's perfectly possible to create a game that affects people in a way that a good piece of art does without having to sacrifice how enjoyable the actual game is. And some of the examples I brought up earlier don't even use very impressive technology, but are still really fun despite also being incredibly powerful experiences. And like I mentioned earlier, since the game story makes use of the player's preconceived notions about violence in video games, I personally think it's important that the act of killing the colossi is actually fun in order for the twist to be more impactful. So all this is to say that for the remake of Shadow of the Colossus that came out in 2018, I was really hoping that new players like me would get a definitive way to experience the game with a little bit of modern polish like how a remake normally is. And I certainly think they managed to achieve that in terms of the visuals because, like, damn, the game looks insane. Comparing this to what the original looked like is incredible. Like, I feel like my eyesight is getting better just by looking at this. But in terms of how the game plays, the too long didn't wipe my ass summary of the rest of this video is that Shadow of the Colossus' gameplay is capable of providing these amazing and exciting moments of grandeur, which are unfortunately drowned out by a lot of needlessly frustrating and annoying shit that the remake could have fixed, and that many aspects of the game that were impressive in the past have unfortunately become a lot less amazing by today's standards, partly due to the game's own influence. Any game that's worth playing usually has a good number of short gameplay loops as well as some longer ones. Short gameplay loops are there to keep you engaged while playing the game because nobody likes a boring game, and long gameplay loops serve the purpose of getting you to come back to the game, aka retention. So for example, in Hades, the short gameplay loop of hey, isn't it fun to beat the shit out of this room of enemies is what keeps you hooked while playing the game, while the longer gameplay loop of hey, don't you want to become friends with all these cool gods and characters is what makes you want to go back to the game and keep doing more runs. And both these things are equally important because you don't want your game to be boring and lose the player's attention, and you also don't want people to just play your game once without finishing it and then never touch it ever again. Shadow of the Colossus does great in terms of retention because its story and the way it tells it is a really effective motivator to get you to want to see the game through to the end. And I've already spent like an entire chapter talking about this, but the way the game subtly presents hints that something's not quite right about this whole save the girl thing is great. Most of the colossi don't give two shits about you until you actually provoke them, and in all the fights you're the one breaking into their homes and being a dick. And over the course of the game, Wonder Boy's appearance starts to change. These are all great things to keep the narrative interesting. Like, what the fuck's gonna happen to Wonder Boy? Is he okay? Like, dude, you can't just throw up in the fucking water here. Animals drink from there, man. But I think the game's age begins to show when it comes to engagement. The short gameplay loop of Shadow of the Colossus that's meant to be engaging can be quite obviously defined as the fights against the Colossi, where at first it's a little puzzle where you gotta figure out where his weak spot is and how to get to it, and then next you gotta actually make your way over there by doing some shit to trick him into exposing himself and climb onto him, and last but not least you gotta cling onto him and stab him while he tries to shake you off. And for me, this last part I just described is easily the most fun part about this entire game, because these are all really exciting and cool moments, and I don't even think I need to explain why. But the reason I said the game's age starts to show here is because out of all these 3 parts of the loop, I only really super enjoyed one, and the way the game is designed, you don't actually spend a lot of time doing this one part, and one of the parts is also not really as interesting anymore, and the other one kind of feels a bit shitty sometimes. At its core, Shadow of the Colossus is a puzzle platformer game. Figuring out how you're supposed to reach the Colossi's weak points is a pretty major part of its gameplay, and I think that although this is still a very unique concept, by today's standard, a lot of the puzzles end up feeling very unfair. This can be best seen in the final fight against Malice, where the game is like, "Hey, remember how we've reinforced over the course of this entire game that stabbing Colossi in anywhere that's not glow and doesn't do anything? Yeah, now we're gonna need you to stab the back of his hand with no indication of that. Good luck figuring that one out." There's a lot of other examples where the game expects you to just know shit without giving you the actual contextual knowledge to figure it out yourself. And this might not have been such a big issue back in 2005, where it was common for games to be ridiculously difficult because they wanted you to keep playing them over and over again instead of actually beating them. You had like Devil May Cry 3, which came out the same year and was so insanely difficult they re-released the game and made it easier. But the reason why this stuff kinda sticks out to new players is because now we have all these newer games that do puzzles in much more consistent and progressive ways. Like how in the final fight against Wheatley in Portal 2, it's like, okay shit, there aren't any portal surfaces around, but the game has taught me that I can use this white conversion gel to create them. And upon further inspection, there's a tube in the corner of this room with white gel in it, and Wheatley's throwing bombs at me, so with a little bit of logical deduction and putting on my thinking cap, I can arrive at the conclusion that I need to trick him into destroying this tube, and bada bing bada boom, there you go. Compare this to if you were to somehow figure out on your own that you were supposed to stab Malice's hand without any indication, and it's a completely different feeling. Instead of feeling smart because you figured something out with the rules the game has taught you, it just becomes, really? How the fuck was I supposed to know that? And I get it, some of you are probably thinking I'm just a fucking idiot who can't solve the puzzles, but I seriously can't be the only person who had their immersion broken because they had to pause the game and open up a fucking YouTube video just to figure out what to do next. Like, what the fuck? Anyone who's played Shadow of the Colossus would know that its camera is coded to automatically pan to an angle that's more cinematic, like how it is in a movie with the rule of thirds and all that shit I would know if I paid more attention during Media Club. This was a really cool feature in the past that no other game had, and it's still a pretty amazing thing even today. The view of Wonder Boy climbing onto some of the Colossi and these moments where you first approach them are genuinely breathtaking, even by today's standards. But I think the problem arises when you realize that you have to actually control the character that's in this movie. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this chapter, games now are perfectly capable of creating these cinematic moments, but they also know when to hand over control to the player and be like, okay, now it's time for you to shoot a bunch of guys in the head. The problem with Shadow of the Colossus' camera from a current standpoint is that, like your clingy ex-girlfriend, it never really knows when to leave you alone. There are a good number of segments in the game where you're required to perform some pretty precise jumps or landings, but doing these becomes a lot more uncomfortable because of the camera. Video gamers nowadays are really used to being at the center of the screen, and a good camera is a very important thing to have for platforming games. But in Shadow of the Colossus, the camera's always immediately forcing itself back into whatever position it thinks it's more cinematic, even during combat, and it leads to a lot of situations where you have to wrestle with the camera for control just so you can look at something. Because God forbid the game doesn't look like a movie for like 1 second. It's important to note that these problems are just a result of the game's age and design, so it's not really something to get upset over, but I do think there is one major thing the remake missed the opportunity to improve on, and that's what we're going to talk about now. Shadow of the Colossus' dated design can also be seen in the structure of its fights. Going back to that whole idea about the game's ability to engage the player, I mentioned that my favorite parts of the entire game, besides maybe the ending, are these intense moments where you're desperately clinging onto a Colossus and trying to stab it. But a majority of the time you spend in combat isn't on these incredible moments, and the game often pulls you away from them on purpose. I don't think anyone will really deny that the game suffers from being pretty clunky, like with its slow and floaty movement and the dumb AI, but I also think it's worth noting that clunky gameplay doesn't automatically mean bad game. There are decent games which purposely have clunky mechanics, but the difference is that the clunkiness in a game like Getting Over It is done in a consistent enough way for a learning curve to be defined so that players can understand and improve at the controls. But Is waiting for an AI to just do what it's supposed to do, or having to deal with Wonder Boy randomly falling over or getting stuck while climbing for no reason, a fun and interesting mechanic for a player to master? Well, apparently the game thinks it is, because these same things are present in both the original and the remake. Did you know that Pelagia is one of the most irritating parts of the speedrun for this game? Because even people who spend countless hours playing through the game practicing the speedrun route have trouble getting this fight to work properly?
Come on, I want to hit the fucking two. Fucking god. Now his positioning is fucked too. He's probably just gonna troll me now. I don't even think he's gonna jump up now.
And I think all this contributes to why you end up spending so much time outside of the best part of the game. Everything takes so much longer than it needs to, which results in fail states where the game's like, okay, now we need you to swim all the way back to that tiny pillar. No, you may not swim any faster. Okay, now wait for him to fly around and shoot him with your bow. Okay, you shot him with your bow, now wait for him. Okay, just give him a second. Yeah, just a little bit longer. Okay, you are now cleared to board the aircraft. But the entire time, the only thing I'm thinking is, okay, just let me cling on to the giant bird and fly around again. God, please! The reason why falling off a Colossus feels so shitty, especially when it's because of the game and not you, is the same reason why the overly long run-ups to bosses in the old Souls games are so annoying, because the game is yanking you away from the most fun part, which is the boss fight itself, or in the case of Shadow of the Colossus, these intense moments. And the game isn't introducing anything new, it's just forcing you to run through a bunch of tedious shit you've already done just to get back to that fun part. And sure, Dark Souls 2 and Shadow of the Colossus are very different games, but even in other platformers like Mario where you might have to retry certain segments when you fuck them up, it's not as bad because just moving around is the fun part of the game. But that's simply not the case here. So many games now just let you get straight back into the action, or at least allow you the option to do so without much delay, because there's no need for meaningless tedium to be part of any game. I don't know about you, but the easiest way to get me to hate anything, not just a video game, is to make me feel like it's wasting my time. And apparently people have shorter attention spans than goldfish now? What? And you might be thinking that I just have the attention span and IQ of a table, which you're not wrong, because I am a psycho that not many people enjoy interacting with, but at the same time, would making the AI more responsive, or increasing Wonder Boy's movement speed during combat, or making the climbing more consistent, or delaying the automatic camera pan for some parts of the game take away anything of value from the experience? I really don't think it would. And if you're still not convinced, then I have this piece of evidence to prove my point. Can you imagine if in Resident Evil 2's remake, you had to aim with a fixed camera and you had to watch this animation of the door opening every single goddamn time? There are a lot of issues spread across the game which I think could have just been removed or improved in the remake for a more pleasant experience overall. Like the climbing dead zones where you get stuck for no reason, and the weird collision box on Argus's hand which makes this happen when it's already troublesome enough to get him to hit the ground with his fist, and Wonder Boy loving to fall over on Basaran even when he isn't shaking around, all of which are, you know, the same problems the game had back in 2005 on the PS2. Even the controls for aggro are like, okay, I get it, you don't actually control the horse, you just tell its AI what to do, so that's why it feels unresponsive and weird. And I get that this part of the game where you're riding around is supposed to be immersive, but like I've been saying, you don't have to sacrifice playability anymore to have these immersive and quiet moments. I know I've been going off a lot, and these last two chapters have probably come across as super negative, so I just want to reiterate that I like this game. I think it's incredible. It's just a shame that when I want to show this game to people, there's so much irritating crap you need to deal with just to see why it's worth your time. And I can't help but feel that the remake missed a huge opportunity to update the game and make it even better than what it already is. I'm not saying that the remake should have fixed every single problem the game had, like I know that there isn't that much room to change a lot of design related things like the puzzles and the way the fights are structured and needing to climb back onto the Colossi multiple times. Like sure, these are issues that I have, but I also get that the game is 16 years old at this point. It's gonna have some dated design choices. And with the way games have evolved, this same spectacle and thrill that I love about Shadow of the Colossus, which was once unique to it, has become so commonplace that it's just one of the 100 other things you can experience in the games it inspired. It's just not enough to carry the gameplay on its own anymore. But that's not Shadow of the Colossus's fault. In fact, it's thanks to its influence we even have shit like this today. But what I am saying is that this is some needlessly frustrating and cumbersome gameplay for a remake that came out on this console in the same year that games like this came out. And I think that is the greatest deterrent that's stopping new and younger audiences from truly appreciating this game today. Because I don't care if a remake's gameplay isn't an exact recreation of the originals, because I'd rather it be improved and added onto and have all that outdated shit from that era be left behind so that the game can be something amazing even by current standards. And if they really wanted to preserve everything about the original, I don't think it would have hurt to have at least included another mode with improved movement and controls and let you swap between the new and original in a similar way that the Master Chief Collection does. Because when I look back at Shadow of the Colossus, I don't want to remember it for all the times I fell off of a Colossus for no reason and had to slowly claw my way back, or all the time I spent waiting for the AI to just do what they were programmed to do, or having to wrestle with the camera and all that other dumb shit. I just want to remember it for the emotional journey it was, and for all these incredible moments it has. Did you know that you can parry, fart, and poo in Sekiro? This has nothing to do with the video. I was doing some research for my last video about action combat, and I came across this video where it was like, Sekiro, things you can deflect, and then apparently it's a thing in the game where in the Guardian Apes fight, you can actually deflect his like fart move and the move where he throws his shit at you. I just thought that was funny. Anyway, thanks for watching my fucking video. I hope that there was at least something in there that was funny or interesting that made it worth watching, and if you're listening to this, it probably means you kinda liked it, so feel free to leave a like down below and maybe share this with anybody you think might enjoy it. And if you're interested, I got a bunch of other similar videos on my channel that you can check out, and maybe subscribe if you want to see more. Also, special thanks to my friend Marmar. You might remember him for helping me with my Xenoblade 2 video, which you should also probably watch if you like this video. He recently started making his own videos too, so I'll leave a link to his channel in the description. Please go and check his stuff out. Also, for the 2 people who actually follow this channel on a regular basis, I might be taking a little break from mental health, because making these videos and writing these scripts are actually kind of stressful, and I got stuff like school to deal with, so I won't be as free. So the next few videos might take much longer and be shorter or simpler stuff. I'm thinking of just doing more story crash courses because those are a lot easier, but yeah, just a little update for you. So until we see each other again.